Wait, wait, wait. And we are live. So, what are we going to discuss today now? We are live.
I mean, I thought you said you wanted to discuss your favorite video games. Was that it?
Now we're going to discuss about Christopher Columbus in general, although it might be late given that Christopher Columbus had already passed back on the 12th. And since so and the reason why we're making the stream about Christopher Columbus Day is because we're discussing about how ever since last year, even more chaotic events have happened in terms of removing many statues that honor the founders of countries within Canada and the U.S., especially in which that people initially thought that the far left is going after Confederate statues, but the conservatives were wrong because they're going after statues of the founding fathers, other U.S. presidents, Union soldiers, and Christopher Columbus. Yes, and we're here to discuss about Christopher Columbus because there are two videos that really needed to be responded to, if which which the first claims that and here's some context about the first video I was about to discuss. The first video was made by a YouTuber knowing better, in which his channel took off, really took off because of that Christopher Columbus video, in which people thought he was defending Christopher Columbus because at the time, due to how the far left have infiltrated education, they made Christopher Columbus to be sort of a villain that, quote unquote, genocided the millions of Native Americans throughout the New World, which is not exactly true, but they made it out to be, along with starting the process of colonization, which is, well, technically true, but they portrayed it in such a negative way that the way the far left frames history right now is such in a negative manner that it basically shames not only the Westerners, especially in the New World countries that were colonized by Europeans, but also it just made Latin Americans feel more ashamed about part of their ancestries, to the point that such view is already spreading throughout Latin America, even though this is not entirely agreed upon by the much poorer people within Latin America. I mean, they don't usually care about Christopher Columbus, or they really get upset when those statues are taken down. So, what do you say about the subjects? Now, before we go on, introduce yourselves to my audience. Settlers Lament, you go first.
Hello, I'm the one and only world famous Settlers Lament, number one new conservative based YouTuber out there. There's no one as epic and based of a channel as I. There's no one that has as epic and based of a channel as I do, and I'm here to, expound upon some of my epic wisdom on Christopher Columbus. And I have ruled that Christopher Columbus is based and epic, and screw all of his detractors.
Night Cringewalker.
Hello, I am a co-host on the Foundations podcast with Owain and Pharaoh. Tune in tomorrow for some Gothic architecture. I think I know maybe enough to speak a little bit in-depthly on this topic. I've read most of his journals. I think Columbus was acting in accordance with what one might expect, and as far as I can tell, most people acted this way, be they Chinese explorers, European explorers, even the rare Incan and even a few Thule explorers who colonized Greenland, if you didn't know. Those would be Native American explorers. So I kind of don't understand the hate he gets in the sense that he's completely ordinary. And there are some numbers and like, saying millions of people died on an island that had no societal structure is like suspicious to me. Islands usually don't have that high population density when they're not having cities. Anyway, just my thoughts.
Also, my audience donate to Settlers Lament, folks.
Yes, exactly. You guys should all subscribe to Settlers Lament, youtube.com/Settlers Lament. And once you're subscribed, you should go to subscribestar.com/Settlers Lament and donate. All donations are appreciated, but larger donations are appreciated more than lesser donations.
I am not monetized, so please give me views so I can say the same one day.
Okay, so going on with knowing better.
Yes, before this started, I had said to Louis that unfortunately I did not watch the videos that he asked me to. I forgot. And I apologize to the audience for that. But I have actually seen, at least a while ago, the original Knowing Better video back when it was relatively popular and stuff. So I'm at least familiar with that. And I am, of course, also familiar with the Christopher Columbus controversy, perhaps not as well as I could be. But I know at least the basics. And there's just a lot of dishonesty surrounding it. I mean, it's common to hear just like normie lefties on Twitter or whatever say that Christopher Columbus killed like 200 million natives or something like that. Or 20, even saying he killed 20 million natives is ridiculous, because essentially what you'll get in like just sort of common arguments about Christopher Columbus is, for some reason, progressives will say that Christopher Columbus is personally responsible for every single death of every native that happened after 1492. Even if you believe all the left-wing narratives about colonization, and that's it, and that it was as bad as they claim it is. And of course, I'm not saying there weren't problems with it and there weren't atrocities and stuff, but I'm saying even if you go with their particularly extreme interpretation of just how bad it is, saying that 500 years, or maybe not saying that every atrocity that happened for the next 500 years is all that Christopher Columbus is personally responsible for every atrocity over the next 500 years is just like obviously ridiculous. Now, I mean, there's of course some deeper arguments which I'm sure we'll get into, but that's just sort of one of the baseline things that progressives will sometimes try to argue.
Okay, so about knowing better. Well, how did you feel about the original Knowing Better? Because it's going to be very difficult for me to explain, as you have judged within the last few minutes. So could you at least tell me how you felt about the original Knowing Better video much better than I do?
Yeah, well, it like I said, it was a while ago that I watched it, so I don't remember it perfectly. But the basic argument, the title of the video was an exaggerated atrocity or something like that, or an exaggerated evil, I think. And he wasn't saying that Christopher Columbus is super based and epic, and I love Christopher Columbus. When is Christopher Columbus getting canonized? He wasn't saying anything like that. All he was saying is that a lot of the things people were saying about him were ridiculous, and like, yeah, he did some bad things, but he wasn't really extraordinarily evil. He just had some pretty average evils for what you'd expect from a person in that position. And from what I remember, it seemed like a pretty reasonable video. And yes, so I mean, that was the basic argument. And I do know that he more recently, which is sort of the point of this stream, did a video where he basically retracted the arguments he was making and said that no, actually Christopher Columbus is a really bad dude. But I haven't watched that video, so I can't quite respond to that.
I did see the original Columbus video and found it sort of informative. I think I watched his Columbus video update, which I don't know. I think I disagree that it was like that retracting. he seemed to just like be LARP on one or two issues that came up. I kind of view Knowing Better as like the Democrat Tim Pool. Someone who's like center right, shifting center left, and like wanting to like preserve my narrative of being like, oh, I'm fair. See, look at me. So like he'll make some like comments on like left or right siding things, and then retract them and like try to sound fair. It's a very typical game to play.
Well, here's the thing about it, though. Have you read the comments section of both his original video and the second video about Columbus? Because it's just vitriol. It's full of vitriol, and they piss me off.
Not a huge amount of it. I think I saw a few like comments about like, oh, my narrative kind of stuff. I don't know. It does annoy me that like so many people basically, had that edgy teacher in like high school history was like, oh, you know what he really did, and then like they're all locked onto that. Oh, like the forbidden knowledge. Look at me, I know the secret of Columbus. I do think that a very important thing to bring up, obviously, is like how do we really fundamentally know what exactly Columbus did if the only documents we have of him come from his political rival? I've asked a lot of left-leaning people, like, would you trust a biography of Obama written by Trump? And if they say no, I'm like, then why the hell are you trusting Columbus's journals? Because it's the same thing, basically. They were translated by Las Casas, who was his rival. And Las Casas was, like, bent on giving a bad image of him.
Okay, and how to explain this? What else? It is somewhere on top of my head. Oh yes, well, okay, now it was gone now. Oh yes, within the original video of Knowing Better, it felt like he was just trying to avoid giving his own opinion, but that didn't stop the far left from portraying Columbus as a genocider who somehow started the transatlantic slave trade as well. But have they ever thought for a second about the other kinds of people he did, albeit from different eras and from different ethnic groups? Oops. Also, there was one idiotic comment I read from the second video of Christopher Columbus that basically said that the Eurocentric history is being taught in Peru. Why aren't they teaching true Peruvian history? I mean, what does Eurocentric history mean? What is unbiased history if even in the most unbiased accounts, they'll still think it's Eurocentric unless it were written by Chinese person or something.
Yeah, I mean, this is par for the course of Americans having this like, the American left having this white savior narrative, where like they see the tribals in Peru teaching the wrong narrative, and like no, you need to preach this narrative. This is the enlightened narrative, the true narrative. And meanwhile, the tribal in Peru is just like, I just want to tell my histories that happened here.
Well, yeah, it's like the Washington Redskins thing, where, as I'm sure many of you know, for years the left has been trying to get the Washington Redskins to change the name of their team, and they have finally succeeded. The team doesn't even have a name really anymore, though they're figuring out what their new one's going to be. And as has been mentioned in conservative circles many times, the polls of actual American natives show that most of them could not care less about the name of the team and don't think that's offensive. But there's just a core of progressive activists who get really upset about this sort of thing. And whenever you see this in like the mainstream media, they'll just say, they'll just say native activists are upset about this and racist whites are pushing back. when in reality it's just a core of progressive activists, many of which are usually white, some of which are native, but many of which are usually white, who are deciding that this is racist and this must change, with little to no actual consent or desire from the supposedly affected group.
So, like Cringe Walker, did you see? So, after the original video by KN, did you see? Did you read the Reddit post from responding to Bad Empanada from Knowing Better within the original description or the pinned comment of the original video?
No. Let me know. What did it say?
It was about Knowing Better responding to a very harsh criticism from a bread tuber by the name of Bad Empanada, accusing Knowing Better of defending Christopher Columbus too much and for being too lenient. And within the Reddit post response to Bad Empanada, Knowing Better said that he had already been clear that he's for the removal of Columbus statues and renaming Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day, or ban the holiday altogether. And it is interesting to note that while the same holidays actually exist within Latin American countries, which are the former colonies of Spain, they are known by different names that basically translates to the Day of the Race or Dia de la Raza.
Yeah,
and other variations.
Well, the Dia de la Raza is that's the longer version of that name is the Day of the Three Races, which is part. Basically, they believe that that's the day that God's creation reunited. It's a very Catholic holiday because it's like, oh, this is the day where the African slaves, the white people, and the natives reunited as if returning siblings to the human family. At least that's the way it's been explained to me when I was in Latin America. I'm pretty sure it's Day of the Three Races, not Day of the Race. But maybe some cultures like Chile would say Day of the Race because they're mostly white people.
Or Mexico, in which the race refers to mestizos very likely.
Exactly. And it's I think a little bit of a forgotten history of how exactly the Spanish conquered these areas. They didn't just walk in with 300 men and conquer a continent. No one can do that. That's impossible. They walked in and got entangled with the local tribal politics and morally chose which tribes were more aligned to the Christian values and then opposed themselves to those tribes which were practicing human sacrifice and stuff like that. There's a historian of Aztec origin. He's an Aztec writer who records, I think he's writing the 1600s, a couple of decades after the fall of the Aztec Empire, and he records all of the religious signs that the pagan priests were seeing, the warning of days coming to change. Put whatever weight into legitimacy you want into pagan priests, but it was interesting that all the Aztec common folk were not big fans of this big angry government that basically kidnapped their tribe fathers and sacrificed to some god they don't know, and then raped their wives and did all kind of crazy shit. No one's going to support that kind of a government. The Aztec just happened to be very powerful because they had obsidian swords and stuff like that, the highest technology in their region. And so when the Spanish came in with steel and gunpowder, all of these captured tribals of the Aztec Empire were here's our chance. I don't even want to say savior necessarily. The narrative gets told that way, but no, these are just simple people. Here's someone with more powerful technology than the guy who's kidnapping our grandfathers and sacrificing them. Of course we're going to choose them. Of course we're going to ally with them. And so I think there's this idea of the Spanish coming single-handedly and destroying the Aztec, when in reality it was a couple hundred Spaniards leading Native American armies against evil governments. So of course they're going to celebrate these men as heroes because they rescued them from human sacrificing devil worshippers.
Yeah, I also think it's quite important to note because people generally don't understand the history of this very well, and I mean I'm certainly no expert on it either. But I think there's a conception among a lot of people that the Aztec Empire was like some ancient empire that had been ruling Mexico forever, which could not be further from the truth. It had not been around for that long. I can't remember exactly when the Aztec Empire was formed, but it was a relatively recent development.
Around the early 1300s.
They were 1 or 2 generations in. They were a very new empire.
So it's not like it's not like they were coming and disrupting like an ancient political order. This was a relatively recent phenomena that a lot of people were not happy with.
Yeah, and this narrative gets repeated in many places. Like for example, the Incan Empire. By and large, it was the nobility and the siblings of the royal family who just, they just wanted to replace the king. It was just an internal conflict. And I think also what gets generalized probably is the plagues. Obviously, smallpox killed a lot of people, but it didn't kill everyone evenly. Like it killed a lot of people in Mexico City because that particular group of people were prone to the disease. But you go down south of the Incan Empire, and you're looking at most of the people surviving. If I recall, I might be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure at least the majority of the people survived. And it was like for most people, the experience was, the same noble families were still ruling them, the same government was ruling them, the same court system, road systems that were over across the Incan Empire were ruling them. Now they just, the king of the country spoke Spanish instead of Incan, and that was mostly what happened. And of course, there was a lot of colonization that happened in the southern parts. Hence, you get Chile, which is by and large a white country, and Peru, which is by and large a Native American country. These being the two constituent components of the kingdom of the nation of the 4 kingdoms, as the Incans called themselves. The northern 2 kingdoms became Peru. The southern 2 kingdoms became Chile. And so you see the playing out of the narratives of every country being very much more diverse and unique, rather than the white leftists just say white man bad. But in reality, there's a far more deeper narrative, and the whole of the continent revolves around Simon Bolivar and his heroic action. He's a mestizo too, and so they're going to celebrate this mestizo hero of theirs. I think he's a mestizo. I'm pretty sure he's a mestizo. Simon Bolivar, basically South America's George Washington. He practically conquered the entire continent, but was more interested in localism, if you will. Well, he wanted a united republic, but
I thought Bolivar was a criollo.
Criollo, was he? Yeah, I'm not remembering his ethnic background. Let me look it up real quick. But he was, he wanted his united South American states, but it didn't work out. That was tragic. But how his actions played out in each individual South American country create whole narratives that were unique to those specific countries. And it's not really just white man bad, right? It's like, hey, this guy's our hero, he's saving us from the corrupt Spanish, or hey, he's freeing us from slavery, or hey, he's freeing us from racism in some cases. He's celebrated across multiple countries as their hero. In many ways, South America is the United States that failed, right? It became a confederacy and independent countries shortly after. And it has unique narratives that are just brushed over by white liberals as white man bad. White man come kill all the Native Americans. And it's just not a true narrative. It's true in some local areas that are the loudest, like Mexico City, but it's, you don't get an entire continent that is majority half Native American if they all died. It would all be white then.
Not just that, but compared to there's someone that wants to. Okay, someone's telling me that I should link a stream to someone's server. Just give me a moment. I was about to explain something. So, as I was saying, oh, what is it again? Yes. as I was saying, so whenever have there any have there any have there been any video about defending Christopher Columbus from a right wing perspective? Or another question to be asked: if a video explains about the nuances with what Christopher Columbus did, would the right, I mean, would the left wingers still constantly say um, that Columbus was still a genocidal maniac,
Yeah.
even if they
Well,
saw
yeah.
nuance?
Well, I know a couple years ago, Michael Knowles. Michael Knowles did a video that I thought was a pretty good refutation, and he's done some speeches and stuff on this topic. I know there's a lot of problems with the Daily Wire guys, but I think Michael Knowles is pretty good. Michael Knowles and Matt Walsh, I think, are both pretty good, and they certainly have cringe takes, but they have quite a few interesting takes. But I think the video and the other stuff that Michael Knowles has done on Christopher Columbus seem pretty convincing. I mean, I've never really delved into the sources, so I can't really say that they're definitely like comprehensive refutations or anything. Or so if you don't read the sources, it's hard to really say for sure. But they seem like pretty good videos when I watch them. And he is he does have a history degree from Harvard, I think, one of the Ivy League universities. So he has, proper training and doing historical research and stuff.
Was that video made by Knowles uploaded to PragerU?
I don't know. I know I just saw it re-uploaded on his YouTube channel because of Christopher Columbus Day, but it's a video he did a couple years ago. I think it was for the Daily Wire.
Because if that video, be it for the Daily Wire or PragerU, been uploaded for PragerU again, the leftists would immediately dismiss it because, well,
yeah, I mean,
they absolutely hate
pretty
PragerU.
conservative source.
Then again, the dissonant right also dislikes PragerU for different reasons.
Yeah.
Yes,
I mean, he might have done a PragerU video, but that's not what I'm referring to if he did do that.
Oh, wait, 21st Reaction just entered my stream interface, yet I can't put him into the stream because the device is not connected. Okay, 21st React is about to join in. Thank you.
Hello, fellow autists.
Reaction. Hello. Do you know plenty about Christopher Columbus' 21st Reaction?
I know that the best thing about him was that he was med, and that's all that matters. But
Okay.
no, I have the history class story very, very clear in my mind from elementary school. Of course, and then by middle school they renege on all of that. It's kind of an interesting thing where they start out with the idealization and then they renege it. So he was the first discoverer of America. Oh wait, no, he wasn't. The Vikings might have done it by middle school. Oh, he was. He brought Christendom to them. Oh no, he actually slaughtered them all. But you know the drill. So.
Okay, and given that the far left also hates Christianity, they won't understand the nuance about the Catholic Church forbidding the enslavement of the Native Americans in the Spanish colonies, and they fail to count that even that the many times natives were truly slaughtered in the Spanish colonies, or I mean enslaved, not slaughtered. That was because they were actually breaking strict laws from the Spanish crown. It's just they couldn't enforce them well due to a lack of technology and the geographical areas, which makes enforcement of such laws very difficult. But the punishment for enslaving the natives were very harsh back then. And yet the left keeps forgetting about that, and due to both a combination of, what they say about Columbus, and because of their anti-Christian stances.
Mm.
I mean, they claim the Catholic Church slaughtered the Native Americans when that's not actually true.
Yeah.
Or
And the Catholic Church is practically the one arguing to save them from slaughter, by various saints and bishops who went there, saw the conditions, and were like, "Hey, we need to help these people."
Although I'm not even sure it's actually based for the Protestants to claim that because they slaughtered the natives in the United States, they prospered, while the Latin American colonies led to mixed results at best.
Well,
Metaphorically, not literally,
no,
as in the economy, such as poverty and crime.
that's actually a rather recent phenomenon, to tell you the truth. Like, not recent, like as in a few decades ago. If you go back in time to like 1930, Brazil was fairly, maybe a little bit earlier before that. Brazil was fairly on course. Brazil and Argentina were fairly on course to matching the United States power projection. I don't exactly know what happened to cause this downplay, a decrease. There's going to be people like, blame the CIA or something. But this decay was starting in like the 1930s or so. But yeah, I don't know what happened in the 1930s to cause Argentina and Brazil and Latin America in general to like kind of start crashing from their achievements. But they were fairly up there. Like Brazil was for a brief time the richest country on earth. Or maybe that was Brazil or Argentina. I compare them a lot, so I forget. But
well, Argentina had basically the same standard of living as most Americans at that time.
Yeah. I don't know if anyone knows what caused this rapid decline over the course of just a few decades, but it was a true testimony to the success of I guess you say the Catholic model. Marry into the natives, convert them, and unify the people. Versus the British model of kill everyone and ally with a few.
Or was it originally ally with the natives, but don't interview with them?
Yeah.
And then slaughtered them only because the other natives started attacking them.
Yeah.
Because of self-defense. Also, there is one ridiculous story I've heard from the leftists, which is the diseased blankets narrative, which I don't even know that's even true, other than I heard that it was only used once in a siege or battle from the 18th century, and that's the only documented time.
Yeah.
I can't remember from which war, though.
I can't either, but I do remember it was a siege during a military engagement. It wasn't like some pre-planned genocide. It was a military officer who just was getting tired of the freaking war, so he was like, just give them smallpox and get this over with.
I mean, clearly, this is the pattern that I see in how they behave academically. They'll throw all these tiny little theories and little crackpot conspiracies that they cook up. They'll cook up like little daggers, and it's death by 1,000 cuts.
Exactly.
And basically, obviously, it's not directed towards trying to figure out what was true. But the whole point is to see what sticks to the wall. So that's basically their job. That's how they make sure they remain salaried and make sure they look like they're productive. They continually baking up new theories of unreality in order to explain their previous mistakes. And what comes to mind just saying that is thinking of how like the Pan-African studies or the African-American studies professors, all these midwit professors that they have to cook up new theories post-1965 about why things were better, better pre-1965. You get the idea. So it's
why has civil rights caused a decline in the black quality of life? You wouldn't expect that, would you? Like, civil rights has actively declined every statistic of the black experience in America. Why were things better for them under segregation? It doesn't make sense. But the reality is that they kind of it wasn't just that they did civil rights, is that they set up the legal exit for the family. That was the key issue.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think you phrased that very well. It's not that civil rights caused
Yeah.
the decline in like black standards of living and stuff. It's why did it coincide with that?
Exactly. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, there's
I'm not.
there's
Yeah.
no correlation there, cringe walker. Stop! I disavow you in Minecraft.
No. Like I'm not saying segregation was good, but I'm saying why have we created something that is worse than it? Like we're just digging deeper into hell. Basically, we're already starting from hell, and we're just digging deeper.
Well, of course, their 1,000 cut theories will be how do we basically have the scapegoat? This was caused by the evil patriarchal white outer society. It was basically caused by. So really, the story is less about answering that real question there of why was it worse post 1965, and just basically obfuscating these other groups.
Yeah, and I do view this as almost like a kind of spiritual fidgeting, where like it's clear their consciousnesses are calling them out on their own bullshit, and to escape the guilt, they're just kind of generating new ideas to get lost in. Like the constant creation of new words, the constant fabrication of new narratives, it's fidgeting. It's a form of fidgeting.
Does that include the term obfuscating nuance?
Yeah.
That sounds about right. But I just wanted to make one point on the Columbus issue. It's really about, obviously, it's about historical narratives and which ones they want to spin. But their basic assumptions are modernist, obviously. It's because it was distant in the past that these Catholic and Christian regimes and European regimes were so brutal, yada yada yada. When I really think of it more as we have to get out of this frame, because it's so strong, even like in my mind, how much they impose 20th century catastrophes on all of like European and Christian history before that. So that's still like stuck in your mind. So for example, one thing to like needle down in your head is there a situation of a genuinely Christian civilization or society that committed a mass genocide like in the 20th century? There really isn't major examples of that other than the Reformation warfare. So it's just this ridiculous putting the cart before the horse and blaming the catastrophes in this post-Christian 20th century civilization on all of Christian history when it's really modernism's the problem, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, of course, what most progressives would say is like, oh well, don't you know Hitler was Catholic? Don't you know that like X group,
which doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's what they just for anyone that's watching, Hitler was not any type of Christian. He was baptized Catholic, as virtually all Austrians were, other than the only real religious minority other than Catholics in Austria would have been Jews. So yes, obviously, like Hitler was baptized Catholic, like almost all infants would have been then. But even in his youth, he disdained the church. Never mind his adulthood. And I mean, this isn't controversial stuff among like mainstream historians. You can like read the Wikipedia page if you want the basic breakdown on this. The entirety of the Nazi Party leadership was explicitly anti-Christian. They were as anti-Christian as they could possibly get away with in a country where many people were still Christian, and almost everyone identified as Christian, at least in the census sense. So yeah, I mean, like that's just wrong, but it's still something you'll hear a lot, that like, oh, Hitler was a Christian, don't you know?
Exactly.
And he also ate sugar.
And he was a vegetarian and had a dog. Yada yada yada. Rada rada rada. But on that point, I was thinking, well, of course, it's this problem of all these modern 20th century people that were basically living in a post-Christian society, and as Peter Hitchens pointed out, it's kind of like Christendom was beheaded and it didn't kneel forward yet for its head to fall off. The people living in this society are really have this kind of outer party effect where they make the problem with progressives attacking Christian people and Christian societies far worse, because you have all these people, obviously like Hitler and many normal people in America and the West, that on the surface level, continued to maintain, oh, we're Christian and we believe these things.
Just for to make the Hitler example a bit clear, though, it's not that he was like a nominal Christian that went to mass occasionally and stuff. Like he hated Christianity for most of his life. So he wasn't even just like a nominal Christian. He was not a Christian at all.
Right. That's true for him. And then also the large swaths of well-meaning, somewhat conservative nominal Christians making the problem worse for us, because obviously some of these people that didn't really think about the fundamental theological issues or reasons for their faith or whatever, where did he go? They kind of function as a outer party straw man for progressives to attack.
That was accidental.
It's okay, but they function as a straw man for progressives to attack as they cause the carcass of Christian society to kneel forward and the head to fall off, as it's happening right now.
Yeah, I guess to draw this in back to Columbus a bit. I've been reading a lot of a poet from Colombia, Nicolas Gomez Davila. Do any of you know this guy? I take that as a no.
No.
He has a really good quote on the issues with like the problems with modernity. One of my favorite quotes is modern man is a prisoner who thinks he is free because he doesn't touch the walls of his dungeon. Which is like it's a bit of a slight argument against deconstructivism. The deconstructivists dread finding the walls of reality that they can't deconstruct because it means they're out of a job. So in Colombia, this is an issue a little bit with like, how do you just watch the deconstructivists walk around in circles in his prison without touching the walls of reality.
It reminds me of the quote of them saying, citizens say that they have free speech, but they're not stupid enough to use it.
yeah. He has a couple of good takes that like kind of express the Colombian frustration with modernity in America and a lot of their secularism. Just trying to find one that I love. This one's very mind you. This guy lived 120 years ago, but No, sorry. No, he was born 120 years ago. He died in 1994, but he's kind of famous for this one quote on how to like basically deal with an age of lies. It was in an age in which the news broadcasts nothing but foolishness. The educated man is defined not by what he knows, but what he ignores. Which is really good. Oh, and he had a nice take on SJWs that was dying societies collect laws like dying men collect remedies. Just like such a good quote. I just want to bring that up just to kind of like bridge us back to maybe Columbus a little bit in terms of like, in many ways, Columbus was that whole era, men who were born in that era of like the 16th century, working in that era, the 16th century, late 15th century, they were really on the cusp of the last gasps of the feudal society and the entering of like the modern world. The science was starting to roll up. Factories were like very primitive factories were starting to show up, like Venice's manufacturing plants for ships. You had the world, the great big world being something you could explore and tangibly define. It was no longer this mysterious thing with unclear borders. And for Europeans going to America, especially Columbus, the whole idea was like, we're going to treat the world like this game that we can play rather than this strange thing that we're threat with. Like only a few centuries before, Europe was dying by the hundreds of thousands from the plague, and the world was a scary place that was going to kill you. And now they're going halfway around the world to find new markets to trade with at the top of global economics. That's a very quick shift. So you have a lot of plays between the medieval world versus the modern world starting to flood into it. I think there's a lot of wisdom in how people were adopting things there. Anyway, just to bring us back to Columbus.
So all of you have brought in very interesting points. So do you guys want to watch and respond it to a second response video to from Knowing Better, so we could respond to it?
Sure.
Okay, I'm going to share this.
I am reactionary.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to share the screen now. Let's see.
Sorry, guys. Thanks for inviting me, but I have to get going now.
Wait, what? Oh, okay then.
Glad to see you.
Glad to see you, Settler.
Where's
Oh, wow.
that tab? So here it is. Sorry, wrong, wrong tab. Sorry, wrong tab. Where's that button?
Well, I definitely hope it's not pretty scary. If it's just the wrong tab, you might get in trouble. But
Okay, that one. Okay, it's that video I wanted to share.
So that's by Knowing Better too. All right.
Okay, we should respond to this. Pause if you have something you need to respond or disagree with.
It is muted. I think you have to click share audio on the options.
Stupid. Okay, my computer's constantly freezing.
yeah,
Okay, the video was muted. Okay, how do I share the audio?
I think there's a way in the audio to. Where is it? Yeah, if you share screen, it should give you the option to link your computer audio, but I don't know. I could share it and we could like watch it on my computer because mine has better Wi-Fi probably.
Oh.
Let me get the.
Okay, I found that option.
Oh, you got it. Okay.
Okay. Okay. I'm going to start over.
I want to start this off by saying we should get
Better
rid of
now?
Columbus Day.
Yep.
We should start celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day. And if cities and towns want to get rid of their Columbus statue or any other statue for that matter, they should be allowed to do so. That has always been my position. But if that's the case, why do I have a video called In Defense of Columbus?
I'm going to skip the intro.
We will ever think of ever not talk about Columbus, at least not in our lifetimes. He's too interesting of a historical figure. He's like the Titanic. Hundreds, if not millions of ships have sunk over the course of human history, yet we keep talking about this one. Why? Because there's so much more going on than just the iceberg. There have been countless explorers, navigators, and colonizers, yet here I am making another video about Christopher Columbus. Why? Because there's so much more you can ask. What does it mean to be lost? He thought he landed on an island off the coast of Asia, which is laughable to us now. But if you were to ask him his latitude and longitude, he would have gotten it pretty much exactly correct. So was he lost? What does it mean to discover? People had been living in the Americas for well over 10,000 years at that point, and the Vikings famously had a settlement for a few years. But the two halves of the world didn't know about each other until Columbus. Regardless of your answers, the historical discussion of these questions is itself interesting and has changed over time. People have been disagreeing about Columbus since Columbus. There were Spanish historians who made things look better or worse depending on their personal views, then British and later Americans told their versions of events. In the late 1800s, Italian immigrants in America wanted an Italian-American hero to celebrate to sort of insert themselves into US history, creating Columbus Day, retroactively making Christopher Columbus an Italian. Italy wasn't a country when Columbus was alive and wouldn't be for another few centuries. He was a Genoese navigator sailing under the Spanish, which technically Spain wasn't a country yet either. See, there
Okay, any disagreements so far? Or any
well, I
comments?
was thinking of the part where he said that he thought he was arriving in Asia. I'm pretty sure that there was some some writing saying that he realized that he was not in a usual place. Landing south of Florida, I think it was him saying that the people there did not seem to be the Asians that he was expecting. So,
Yeah,
but that's just a little.
He thought he did originally think he was in Asia somewhere. Like it wasn't clear where Asia was on a map, how far around the world it was. They knew what it looked like. They didn't know how far away it was, because like the further away you got from Europe, the less reliable your distances were because you didn't have as much navigation. So he wasn't sure if like Asia, like Japan, he thought he landed on Japan basically, or Taiwan. But it is important to remember also that Columbus didn't know about the continent. He only knew about the island. He died kind of ignorant about the rest of South America. He thought he had discovered basically Japan or Taiwan or something, and that somewhere further west would be Asia. I'm pretty sure he died before proper exploration of the continent occurred, or he just died rejecting it.
One thing I should point out is that during the part where he said that Spain wasn't a country yet, you do realize that by comparison to the different Italian city-states and the Italian kingdoms in the south, namely the Kingdom of Naples and Sicily and the Papal States, Spain, the Iberian Peninsula, was actually more united. I mean, King Ferdinand of Aragon and Queen Isabella of Castile married each other, so they basically united two different Iberian kingdoms into one country. And then they had conquered the Emirate of Granada, which would later become the Spanish province of Andalusia, which means that compared to Italy at the time, Spain was more united. Or, I mean, the Iberian Peninsula, not counting the separate kingdom of Portugal. That's something Knowing Better didn't point out.
Just brief comment about at the very intro, he was saying that he's fine with certain areas and cities removing statues if they so choose to. And Knowing Better, just so everyone's clear, is one of like the typical centrist figures, slightly higher IQ than most of the other people on YouTube, but of course he's appealing to liberalism. There, people can choose to remove this stuff if they so please, but then there's never any pushback to the right of it to staunchly resist something, to say no, you're not free to do that thing. So he's participating, capitulating to this slippery slope where I'm going to appeal to liberalism and my enemies won't, and they'll push farther and farther over time.
Not only that, but Knowing Better made it clear that he's for supporting the removal of his statues, which we'll get at later into the video. Moving on.
They're sailing under the Spanish, which technically Spain wasn't a country yet either. See, there are so many different tangents and angles to this story that it's almost a perfect storm of historical discussion. And that's the story I wanted to tell. A few months ago, a response was made to my Columbus video, which took issue with some of my portrayals. I am not going to talk about that video here. I disagree with some of the characterizations, but I've already talked about that in a Reddit thread, which I'll link below. They've seen my response and said they're cool with it. So I am not trying to stir up drama, but it would be disingenuous of me to not mention it since this video wouldn't exist without that one. I also said I would rework the Columbus video before the next Columbus Day, so shortly after that response video came out, I was in a live stream with Central_Committee and Cormentine where we picked apart my Columbus video in real time. That experience made me realize that I don't really want to rework the old Columbus video, not because it's incredibly inaccurate or I'm embarrassed by it, but because that's just not what my channel is about anymore. So with it being 2020, let's use the power of hindsight to examine the original video and its shortcomings.
Okay. Any comments so far?
No, I think he's getting busy with his Reddit moments, and he's just reacting to the reactions of his videos. So
Okay.
As I've already said, this video is not a response to the response, partially because my original video is itself a response, and that's just too many layers for me. Most people know the basics when it comes to Columbus. They know the names of the 3 ships, and that in 1492 he gave us a day off of school. You know, the elementary school stuff. But they might not.
Okay, I do need to point out that I don't think most schools actually offer day offs on his day. I mean, that never happened when I went to middle school and high school. So what was he talking about? Maybe it's dependent on the school district and the state.
yeah, that's right. I remember one time at least getting off when I was living in a certain area, but yeah.
Okay.
Not know the year of his second or third voyage, or where he landed, or what year he died. In 2017, the Dakota Access Pipeline was built, and the country's current and past treatment of Native peoples was at the forefront of public consciousness. That year, a number of comedy channels decided to make Columbus Day videos, which I felt took advantage of the general population's lack of detailed knowledge of Columbus.
Does anyone know any context about the Dakota pipeline?
I think it was one of those issues in like 2015 or 2016 that progressives were reading about. Like the Dakota Access Pipeline was a new pipeline that was going to get approved, and the usual yada yada rada rada about, oh, it's going through Native American lands and it's going to pollute everything up. I didn't look specifically into the issue, but you know, I'm sure there was a grain of truth there about, oh, some oil spill or whatever, but it's the typical thing. I also love to notice, just now that I see all those guys, I used to watch those guys, this Bugman after Bugman after Bugman. It's just sad.
So if the pipeline was about to create new jobs, would leftists support it, or is there an issue among the dissident right whether such environmental damages would be worth it just to create jobs? It's a very conflicting issue.
Which elitist bourgeois faction will you support? The one that doesn't care about the working class, culturally conservative unionists that want to do the pipeline, or the one that cares about conservation for some like nostalgic reason?
Okay, this is confused. Maybe the latter.
Exactly.
This is
Yeah,
going
but
to be.
I think he's going in circles right now. Probably if you go to like minute 6, it's probably gonna get more specific.
Would the pipeline be considered a violation to Native American sovereignty? Oh wait, they approved it.
Well, yeah, they eventually. I think. Oh yeah, it was the Obama era. I think they approved it in the end, but basically the whole idea was it's going through Native American land, therefore it's violating their sovereignty.
Okay.
So I decided to respond to some of those videos. I assumed most everyone was already familiar with the general story and popular claims against Columbus. So rather than spend time on that, I just focused on debunking some of the more ridiculous claims, usually in a well actually tone. In my defense, that style of video was pretty popular at the time. The main video I'm responding to is from the guy who basically made well actually famous.
Actually,
You might think that style of video is awful, and the algorithm would agree with you. There is a reason I had fewer than 3,000 subscribers when that video came out, and for several months afterwards. This is why I laugh when people tell me to bring back the live action intros, since nobody was watching me back then. I made a number of videos in that style, though I think I got away with it in this video by lampshading the fact that I was literally cherry picking stories from history. The point is, none of these videos were popular when they first came out. I released Columbus in December 2017, which was after Columbus Day that year. It saw some initial success on Reddit, but that was it. It wasn't until I shifted away from nitpicky responses and towards a more narrative style that the channel really took off. And even then, it was mostly old videos like 4K TVs and wannabe states. The Columbus video didn't see its first real success until a year after its release on Columbus Day 2018. I was happy that those older videos were doing well and my channel was growing, but I was mostly focused on making new content. So when people wanted to respond to or discuss my old videos, it's because they were seeing it for the first time. But to me, they were year-old topics that I had no more interest in. I knew some of my older videos.
Okay, so any comments so far?
It sounds like a cope.
Yeah, sounds like he's I mean, it's basically kind of showing how these guys are, where, you know, obviously it's all meta discussion. He's discussing about the video and people's reaction to it rather than, you know, the topic of Columbus himself. But it just seems pretty clear that he's pretty malleable to the popularity he gets, the audience he gets, and he's more concerned with about that and receiving attention than what he might think is true. Bugmen detected.
You guys are allowed to interrupt me in case you see something weird. Okay, going on.
Weren't very good, not just when it comes to production value, but I was still trying to figure out how to present information to camera. There's a reason it took so long for the channel to take off. In the beginning, I was still trying to market myself for grad school or a future job, so all of my videos took a centrist political stance, which is a good skill to have for a teacher, but not so much for YouTube. I also assumed a base level of understanding. I didn't spend a lot of time on basics because I figured you already knew them, which again is a good skill for higher education, not YouTube. The Columbus video.
Okay.
Yeah.
What just so? Any comment on that?
Yeah, I was about to interrupt there. Did you see how he functions? It's like I just said. I feel like I predict the future or something, but it's literally. You gotta understand with these people, it's literally not about a preference for truth or whatever. It's about a preference for comfort and maintaining relative acceptance. So he's saying he intentionally made a centrist stance, whatever that means. A centrist, basically the most within the Overton window, the most acceptable idea there. He intentionally pivoted to that stance for his early videos, not necessarily because it was true, but that's what he needed in order to get attention and take off. And then, I mean, it's kind of surprising how he just says this stuff, but you know.
Yeah, I mean, like if someone says I'm going to take a middle of the road approach to give both sides the noise, it's like he's either telling the truth or hiding his power level, and he'll probably reveal it soon after.
And yet, some BreadTuber criticized his original video for being too lenient on Columbus, even though that was a centrist take at the time, quote unquote, on the word centrist. This is that an implication that the Overton window has shifted so far to the left that a centrist stance would be considered far right or monstrous to them?
Yeah. I think it's pretty obvious that if you're on the progressive boat, to use a phrase from Don the Pleb, everyone right of Mao is a fascist. I think we should really start using this phrase. You know, if we all just started saying, "Oh yeah, we're right of Mao," it would really like meme it. I think as like a kind of like ridiculous level of like how ridiculous progressives have gotten on that degree.
It looks. I mean, with these like with these guys that try and straddle a mainstream position, try to remain, you know, kind of respectable and optical and such. You can tell like the increasing anxiety. I mean, with this guy, maybe he's not, you know, super aggressive and incompetent or whatever. But you can tell there's this kind of anxiety and difficulty, increasing difficulty that these e-celebrities are having with straddling that position as things get more and more polarized over the past 5-10 years. So it just becomes incoherent. Like he was, he still got responded to by the bread tubers, like you said, because it's never enough.
Okay, then. So overall, do we even know the truth about Columbus without such biases, or this is impossible because of the way, how very partisan this topic has become?
I'm very convinced that we simply do not have the information of how good or bad he was, and like oftentimes out of dozens of pages of his journals, they take like one or two sentences and say, look, he's a slaver, he's a rapist and stuff like that, when really what he was saying was the normal policy of any leader, regardless of religion or culture. Like, put your men on a base and marry the local women. He won't use phrases like marry. He'll say like, take local women, because that's how you described it. Back then, marriage wasn't some choice you made. It was diplomatic relations.
Yeah, screw freedom.
They weren't free people. Like, no marriage in the year 1490 was like, or like 99% of marriages were enforced by parents who wanted like to increase their tribal power. It's just the reality. It's just the reality of the time period.
I mean, I'm going to link to in the chat on the right the original response video from the Bread Towards Knowing Better's original Columbus video. I can't remember whether it was long or not, but it's just very atrocious, as typical of bread tubers. Do you see the link?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Going on.
Was made keeping those strategies in mind, which some have called irresponsible. And going by the modern standards of my channel, I agree. I've long since abandoned that approach to making videos. You might not have noticed, but during this video, I tell you the entire story of the Stanford Prison Experiment from start to finish, 3 different times from 3 different perspectives. I never tell you the full story of Columbus. In the past, I've unlisted or even redone videos that I thought fell short or needed to be updated for whatever reason. That was the original plan here. But in evaluating where my channel is now and where it was then, I don't want to do that. I don't want to defend Columbus. He is not worth defending. And I used to tell people, including myself, that the video isn't really a defense of Columbus. I know I called it that, but that's the YouTube game. Nobody's going to click a video called a nuanced discussion of some of the recent depictions of Columbus in popular culture. But since I never discussed the things Columbus actually did, and instead...
Okay.
He showed his power level. He just showed it. He's like, yeah. Oh, sorry?
Which is what? What power level?
No, he's a he's just a tad bit right of progressive land. So he is right of Mao, but he's comfortably on that fence between Mao and everyone else. And he just wants to be able to like look on that fence and say, "See, I'm one of you, without getting like pushed over it."
That is not over 9,000.
It's like negative 9,000, really.
And besides, do people even care about nuance?
Of course not.
And of course, well, obviously to me, anybody to the left of, I don't want to say, but he's of course a progressive to me because of how he behaves. Obviously, a progressive from my view is basically just acting reasonably in pursuit of pleasure, power, and status. So obviously he was saying, I'm not going to defend Columbus. I'm not going to pick certain educational topics because I'm worried about rejection from an audience or other e-celebs.
But have you even read any comments section from progressives in which they give out walls of text? Is that even nuance? Or just
no,
their obfuscation with nuance when that's just them obfuscating their very flawed logic with word salads or something, even though I'm improperly using the term word salad.
There's a word for it. I promise, Louis. It's way better. It's blarp. So what they do is it's just like blarp, a vomit of emotional vitriol, run-on sentences, circular points, just to make themselves feel. It's not about communicating how you're wrong. It's about establishing certainty for themselves, so they feel less guilty about completely denouncing people.
Yeah, I have to say, like, one of the things, the basic disciplines I've developed in my various writings is like, I will always read back to myself my reply, and if I lose interest before I finish it, I try to reduce what I'm writing, because it's like, if I'm already uninterested in reading my own shit, no one's gonna want to read this shit. So like the famous blarp meme of like just a wall of text, it's the person's not actually thinking of what they're saying. They're basically just like copy pasting their professor's indoctrination.
Yep, must be the obfuscation, full of sophistry. I mean, I mean that's how the wall of text itself became a meme. I mean, have you saw any community tab, any posts from Endeavor's community tab in which he made that made up meme that featured ContraPoints responding to Trump and about biological sex and gender, and that fake quote from ContraPoints is basically a wall of text, which shows how sophistic the progressives are. They make no sense within the walls of text. And then there was another meme Endeavor posted that involves with anarcho-communism, and it's still a wall of text.
Well, the wall of text itself is not just a progressive trope. Of course, it's evocative of the midwit themselves. You know, the midwit thinks making a wall of text makes them sophisticated and coherent and comprehensive. When of course, you know, it's the meme of the bell curve where the low IQ is just brief, and then the midwit is expansive and all nuance and so-called, and then the high IQ is brevity is the soul of wit. But you know, they have a bias towards complexity, just because their opponents, you know, are more simplistic.
And yet they accuse me of being illiterate whenever I can't read the walls of text. But then again, I'm not always as intelligent as, say, Endeavor or the alternative hypothesis.
I mean, yeah, whenever someone accuses you of being illiterate, like, have fun with it. Just say, okay, good. Whenever someone accuses me of being illiterate, I will instantly start speaking in the Grug meme. Like, thereafter, I just only speak in Grug. And I'm like, Grug not read long. Like, I'll just start speaking like a fucking caveman just to play with it. Because
That's not even an insult to me. It's that sounds based. Being illiterate is based. I just speak my mind. It's a stream of consciousness that is just raining down wisdom on these people, and I don't need to read or write this down. I don't need to write it down because it's just in my brain. It's so great. It's like reading books. You don't need to read books. Nick was right about that.
There's a famous line from Enoch that I rather like, which you can tell was written by it was probably added in by a scribe copying this on a papyrus. It says, "Man was not made for writing books about how to be a saint, but to actually be a saint." And I think it's a really good like insult to self-help books, basically.
Okay. Going on.
I'd spend the whole time debunking spurious claims made by literal cartoon characters. It is a defense of Columbus. And since I wouldn't remake that video today, rather than rework it, I've enlisted the help of my friend Cogito to help me put that past defense of Columbus in its
Yes?
What's Cogito? Okay, I thought I heard Cogito. Never mind. Keep going.
Okay. It said so in the closed captioning. Okay.
proper context. In August 1492, Columbus departed from Spain on an expedition to find a western route to the island of Cipangu, now known as Japan. Columbus didn't come up with the idea or the route. Every mapmaker in Europe agreed that this is where Japan was because everyone was basing their work on Marco Polo's travel guide, which gives distances in days' journey rather than miles. As a result, they grossly overestimated the size of Asia, placing Japan where Mexico is in reality. When Columbus landed on Hispaniola 2 months later, he assumed he was on an island off the coast of Japan and continued to search for the cities of gold Marco Polo described. After a few months of exploration around the Caribbean, he returned to Spain with several native Taino people.
This is the stupid thing. This is like just ridiculously biased. First of all, it was common practice for most tribal people all around the world to give a newcomer slaves if they had wealth. This is just like a gift offering. It's a universal thing. Every king of a tribe has slaves, and they usually give some of their slaves to a newcomer to like secure peace. It's such a common thing that there's a freaking like event for every king in CK2 that, you know, a traveling band of people come and gives you a random eunuch. This is not some like he didn't take these people. He was given bondservants by the king as like insurance. So the act of giving or taking, even like giving hostages, it was a term that we translate as, you know, taking hostages, but a lot of times these were like willing people that went with the newcomer to learn their language and understand it to be so that they could be the first generation of translators. So like Columbus didn't like, you know, get up on a horse and take a bunch of people. He went to the king and was like, hey, I want these guys to teach them like language. In fact, this is such an ancient practice that when the Vikings visited Native America like 400 years before this, 500 years before this, they actually write about taking hostages of Native Americans to teach them the language so they could talk to each other.
Yeah.
and this is something that like even Vikings did this when they came to Canada. They took the local tribals, I think they took 2 children hostage to teach them the language and get a lay down of the land. Because further context, the Vikings got into a fight with their parents, and the parents died, and they weren't going to abandon the kids in the middle of the winter. So they took them as hostages for the local tribe to create a translator. And those 2 kids went on to becoming 2 of the first Native Americans that got baptized by the Vikings. So they clearly weren't being tortured or enslaved because they were happily willing to stay with the Vikings instead of their own native people. And the same thing with like a lot of these people that got kidnapped, quote unquote, from Hispaniola. These Taino people went to Spain, and a lot of them stayed there as like translators and like to like express knowledge of the area. If they didn't die from smallpox, of course, they went on to become very wealthy people because, you know, the king's gonna pay you a lot of money to tell you where the gold is in the island. Sorry, someone's breaking up.
Was that 21st reaction?
I think it was. He said something that wasn't robot. But like you can clearly see the bias in the cartoon because, you know, he's holding a cross, poking at them to be slaves. It's like that's not how that works. No, sorry, buddy, that's not what's happening here.
And how does the narrative?
Sorry, it even says it in the text with the outly expressed purpose of teaching them Latin and Christian. Yeah, they didn't kidnap these people to be slaves. They kidnapped them, quote unquote. They took them hostage to be like a diplomatic tool to teach them language and religion so that there would be a middleman so that people wouldn't get killed from confusion. Oh, 21st Century dropped out. I guess his line died. He'll probably be back. Like this is something that really infuriates me because when we use words like hostages today, the first memory in our culture of this, the most recent memory of this is like what happened in Iran or elsewhere, or like North Korea. So we think of this as like an evil thing, but the word hostage comes from like a diplomatic mission. Like you gave hostages to the king you visited to both create an insurance policy because you're telling the king, hey, if I fuck up, you get to keep this person. You're also creating a translator and a scholar. Usually the person who's being given as a hostage is one of the smartest people in the tribe because, you know, this is the guy who's going to like form the diplomatic channels. And the guy who's getting hostage taken, he's usually pretty well taken because he's the nexus of information. They need him alive in order to communicate. He's not like some kind of like slave doing like slave labor. He's literally living in a palace, being fed great meals and good healthcare to learn languages. Like it's basically a research grant.
Okay, someone just said in the chat slavery is based.
No, not that. There is bad slavery and like chattel slavery. This isn't hostage taking. Isn't the same as chattel slavery. It's just stupid.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I would
reaction coming back.
I would literally I would like to say one thing about the word the history of the word hostage. It comes from the word obsessed, because the person who is a hostage is obsessed with the other culture.
Going. Okay, let's continue.
With the outwardly expressed purpose of teaching them Latin and Christianity. Intent is a major theme of my original video and many of my other videos at the time. I've often told you the reasoning of the people involved without offering any counter-arguments or even my own personal feelings. In this video, I explain the reasoning behind dropping the atomic bombs and putting people into internment camps during World War II. Two things I personally very much disagree with, but since I only ever give their perspective, it comes across as my perspective. Whether Columbus intended to teach them Christianity or just wanted to kidnap them.
Okay.
There's 2 points there. This is, my fence narrative. Like, I'm going to just tell you their arguments. I don't actually believe those arguments. This is a typical fence sitter argument. Like, I'm merely I'm just the messenger. Don't shoot me. Well, it's bullshit. He's just being a proselytizer of his views. Yeah.
I was about to say there's a difference between don't shoot the message and don't shoot the messenger.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then right here, what he just said in the last second, where the Columbus attention. Oh,
21st reaction has returned.
Nice. Okay. 21st century, you were cut off, but you were saying something about.
My internet had an aneurysm. But oh no! Now I probably lost the thought, but
had to do with hostages.
Oh yeah, it was like, dang, I'd probably want to be a hostage if some striking med comes into my shores and says, I could take you to an amazing land of gold and frankincense. I'd be like, all right, I'm in. And I'm sure it's so kind of ironic in a little way how the kinds of people that will repeat this stuff like, he was a slaver and he was cruel and stuff, like white feminists in college, when they're just the type of ones that want to see the world and travel instead of staying home and having a family or whatever. So it's like you'd imagine those ladies would probably be going on the ship with them back then.
Yeah. I mean, again, like, in the modern context, rape is bad. Okay, yes, but back then,
man, come on, man,
no, this is not a hot take. Back then, women were given as like property to new men, and this is what everybody did. The tribal chiefs of Hispaniola did this. The Spanish did this when they made diplomatic ties to the Holy Roman Empire. Every culture did this. It was not, you could call it evil today, okay,
except Christian culture.
No, Christian culture where you gave wives as property too.
Well, no, but I was talking about the rape part, but totally disavowed. Terrible.
Yeah, no.
All of past is really bad.
Today you would call that rape, but back then they would not call that. They would just call that marriage. I'm just telling you the facts. Like, people would give their children as like diplomatic offers. In fact, I would even go so far as to say marriage was a form of hostage taking and giving. It was literally the same thing. Like, oftentimes,
oh man, we must make this channel survive, man.
No, it's not like that much of a spicy take, because like, obviously that's wrong in our current context where we believe in like rights and decision making. But like, if you were like, the sister of a king in like the 12th century, you were raised to expect this to happen, and it was a good thing. And like, you can call it evil if you want now, but back then they'd be perfectly okay with it, because it's like, hey, I'm gonna go live in a big fat palace. And again, to return to the current topic that I was bringing up, Do you guys know what happened to Montezuma's royal family after the Spanish took over in Mexico?
No. I thought
Well-
the rest died out.
No. Today, at this time in the 21st century, there is a house in Mexico, not Mexico, in Spain. It is, hold on, let me look it up. There's a house in Spain, in Madrid, I think it is. No, sorry, scratch that. Let me reset that. There is a dukedom in the courts of Spain, and the dukes, they don't have political power anymore. It's a hereditary title in Spanish nobility. It is called Duque de Moctezuma de Toltengo, and this hereditary title in Spain is the current heir to the Moctezuma line, the royal family of Aztec. After the Spanish took over, the entire royal family moved to Spain to serve the court of the Spanish government as his loyal subjects. And to this day, there are palaces in Spain owned by the Moctezuma family, Native Americans who went to Spain as nobles. There's a palace of Moctezuma located in Salamanca in Castile and Leon. There are whole royal palaces to this day of the royal family of Moctezuma. And so, what, did they just like become slaves and live in palaces in Spain? No, they were given hostages, and when they got to Spain, they became very wealthy doing their jobs of being translators and scholars, and they were rewarded with noble titles as human beings. And the left,
He left again.
he's a bad internet, I guess. Like, I'm not trying to be like edgy or anything. It's just the reality. 21st century. Did you hear what I said about Moctezuma?
I heard all of it, unfortunately. Optics, man, optics.
What the left is going to tell you? The left is going to tell you that the entire Moctezuma line was executed by Cortez, but the reality is that the line was, they moved to Spain and served the king, and today they live in palaces in Spain.
I wonder if technically Montezuma committed treason because, he abandoned the rest of the Aztecs.
Well, I mean, Moctezuma himself was killed by the Spanish when they entered
Oh, right.
Mexico City.
Yeah, but the point still stands.
Yeah. Sorry for my base Latin American knowledge. I have a lot of Spanish friends and love Spanish history.
I have a few acquaintances from Latin America on a different Discord server, and I talk to them occasionally. Although most of them are from South America, including the Southern Cone. But I couldn't find anyone from Central America directly. So shall we move on?
Yeah.
Oh, and one more thing. You're going to share. Are you able to share your screen from your account, Night Cringe Walker?
I am.
Could you show me the palace?
Sure. I will show you the palace. So Dukes. Okay, here we go. And share screen of. Here you go. So here is the Duke of Moctezuma de Toltengo. It's a hereditary title in the Spanish nobility. It's held by a line of descendants by Emperor Moctezuma II. The current holder is Antonio Mario Mazzella de Teruel Moctezuma y Navarro.
What
Navarro.
Anglo moment?
I
Jeez.
can't speak Spanish. I'm terrible at it.
Let me do it. Antonio Maria Marcilla de. I can't read the last word because of the blurry image. There it is. Darn it. Antonio Maria Marcilla de Teruel Moctezuma y Navarro.
And so this is the it's a pretty boring looking palace, but the interior is pretty nice. That's one of their many palaces. So that exists over there. It's the Palace of Moctezuma, located in Spain. And
Oh, that's impressive.
they became knights. They became a line of knights for the Spanish throne. And in fact, some of them, if I remember correctly, some of them became conquistadors and conquered up.
Oh,
Trying to find-
Ronak.
Yeah, here's another photo of it. See, Google's confused. Do you want the palace in Mexico City or do you want the palace in Spain? Leon.
Well, I'm glad Cringewalker is well versed in this, but I'm afraid I'll have to go because the internet's not working and I'm just burning through data.
No worries. Sorry about that.
All right,
I
but
really wish-
I did have some hot takes. I hope though.
Yeah.
Uh,
Anyway.
good, but you're leaving now. He just left.
Yeah, he's gone. Sorry. I mean, I can stick around. It's an hour and a half now, so we can stick around to the end of the video if you want, and I can just like give a few comments.
Okay, I really wish there are other people joining in, though. I have had difficulty trying to get other people in.
Yeah, it's
despite
Saturday
the
night, but
announcement.
let's see.
Okay, let's continue watching the video.
Them is irrelevant because in the end, it looks the same. Many people mark this as the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade. However, I disagree on a purely semantic basis. The transatlantic slave trade typically refers to African slaves being transported across the Atlantic to be enslaved in America, not Americans being enslaved in America, which happened 6 months later when Columbus returned to the Caribbean with 17 ships and the expressed purpose of establishing permanent settlements. This was the beginning of the encomienda system, which was similar to the feudal system of lords and peasants in Europe. People given an encomienda didn't own the people, they owned the land, and the people were just another feature on that land to be exploited. While this isn't chattel slavery where people were auctioned off in front of a crowd, it's a distinction without a difference. The fact that they own the land, not the people, didn't stop it.
Yeah, this is like nonsense mostly. This is a feudal system because Spain was a feudal system. I mean, it was a dying feudal system, but it functionally is a feudal system. The Lord was the conquistador, his people were there, and not for nothing, but like a lot of them did a pretty decent job at defending native rights. Like Cortez, for example, personally instituted for his domain that if a native brought forth accusation of like a conquistador raping a Native American woman, he would personally have that. Well, if it was proven, and it often was, he would personally execute that soldier. And so his own men knew they were Christian men, and if they walked out of line, Cortez was coming for them just as harshly as he came against the native kings. Cortez is celebrated by the native peasants because he was fair. He took over and he had absolutely no concern with who he was judging. He was going to judge by the law, letter of the law, for all people evenly and equally. And this is why to this day, the West, American liberals might hate Cortez, but the Spanish or the Latin Americans rather like him because he was this icon of legalism, like of the law. He was fair and to the point, and became an ideal to reach up for. He got in trouble for being so fair. The Spanish tried to replace him because he was killing his own soldiers if they did bad things. So saying that this is like a form of slavery and stuff like that, I mean, and under that argument, then all of feudalism is a slavery system, and it's simply not true because these people were entitled to lots of free time. They only worked for like a third of the year during like the harvest season and the planting season, and for the rest of the time they held in common the fruit of the land that the Lord would give them, and the Lord was very intent on keeping them well because if they died, the land was completely useless. One of the reasons why African Americans were brought in, because the Native Americans kept dying off due to the diseases spreading. Again, the Europeans did not want the Native Americans to die from diseases because it was messing with their feudal system. You can't have a feudal system if the peasants die. The African slaves were brought in. Also, fun fact, the person who advocated to bring in slavery in the first place was Casas, the Spanish bishop or priest, the Jesuit who defended Native Americans and wanted to protect them from slavery, advocated for African slavery to replace the native slaves. So like even the same guy, there's a lot of people that want to advocate for Casas replacing Columbus as the day's name and celebration, but he was totally for slavery. So it's a ridiculous thing. The left doesn't even know, because the left wants to like scapegoat new heroes to replace old ones, but they don't even read the new ones and realize they're just the same people. You know, something to think about.
The irony.
Mm.
Yeah. What was I was about to say something, but now I suddenly forgot. Oh yes. Didn't Knowing Better in his original Columbus video say something about Columbus being harsh against his soldiers because of their treatment towards the natives,
Yes.
which he seemingly was responded with harsh criticism.
Yeah, I've read most of Columbus's traveling journals, and he explicitly expresses his difficulty keeping his men from abusing the natives. And so, like, you have to say, obviously, like, well, if Columbus is so evil, why is he not wanting this to happen? You know, why is he constantly having to punish his own men and stopping them from causing harm to the Native Americans? He explicitly comes, and when he leaves a couple of his best men to build a fort and wait out until the second journey arrives. And while the fort is away, no one knows what happens to this fort. We just know that everybody died in it, and the Native Americans apparently claim that they destroyed it. It's not really known what happened, but when he came with the other ship, the reasons why he was kind of violent was because they killed all his men, who admittedly were kind of bad, but he was already known as someone who was going to punish them if they did bad. So there's a bit of a loophole logic here of like he left his best men and brought his worst men back to him with Spain, I think, if that's correct. And I don't know, it's like I'm rambling at this point, but it's like there was already a conflict happening when he came back. That his people had been killed by the natives. The natives were kind of going nuts, and so of course he's going to come back and start a war to revenge the people who got killed. If they did anything, it's not known, but it is known that he punished his soldiers, and they knew that they were going to get Columbus's wrath if they did anything. So make of that what you will.
Okay, let's continue.
Yeah.
Them from brutally mutilating and killing the native Taino people whenever they felt like it. Columbus was an active participant in that mistreatment. While he may not have personally murdered anyone, he was the governor of the colonies. He wasn't really doing anything to stop it, and on several occasions, he outright ordered it. Near the end of his third voyage
Yeah,
in
you can stop that. He was destroying. He was executing rebels and criminals because he had effectively become the island's government and replaced the local kings, the same exact kings who would have been doing this by their own laws before Columbus was there. It's a retarded argument. Like, the kings would have been executing these people themselves. Columbus took over and just assumed control of their legal system. So, like, what the fuck are you doing? You're blaming Columbus for following their own fucking laws. So, forgive my language, sorry. It's just a dumb idea. And of course, he animates it to make him look bad and conniving when the guy was basically just like a failed merchant. It's just stupid. It's just stupid.
The king and queen of Spain replaced Columbus as governor, citing his inability to extract enough silver and gold and his mistreatment of the Spanish.
Again, the reason why he wasn't extracting enough gold is because he wasn't actually that brutal. He could have just straight up tortured them and worked them to the brink and not given a shit. He didn't. And that's why he got in trouble, because he wasn't taking enough gold. He was being fair, running a legal system, keeping things in line, because there was a huge ethnic shift that had occurred. I mean, like, it's a self-contradictory argument. Like, oh, Columbus, the evil man who's enslaving all the natives, but for some reason can't get any gold. What's going on? Oh, Columbus. It's like, yeah, because he's not working them to the death. It's a feudal system. Feudal system, your serfs get rights to private time and free time. You're only allowed to really work in the planting season and in the harvesting season. I think for mines, it's maybe in the winter. I forget, but it's stupid. It's stupid.
Also, didn't that part, as you implied, contradicted what Knowing Better said in his original video? I can't remember some of the video, but it felt like he pointed out that that Columbus was already treating his Spanish soldiers harshly because of what they're doing to the natives, and somehow the leftists kept flip-flopping on that and still call him a monster.
There are known
vitriol.
again, to use Cortez as an example, his number 2 was brutal to the Native Americans to get gold, and got a lot of gold. And Cortez didn't like this brutal guy, so he I think he had him killed. I forget, but like Cortez and his number 2 were often rivaling at each other because Cortez was fair, and his number 2 was harsh, very harsh to Native people. And so when you have justice, you're going to have a slower production rate because you're not having a chattel slavery. If you had an unjust society, you'd have a high extraction rate, and you see this played out today with dictatorships are really good at getting resources out of the ground because they beat the people to death to get it out of the ground. I think C.J. Gray had a saying in one of his videos. A mine still makes gold if the laborers are dying, because as long as you keep bringing in new laborers, you could just have a death rate that's as long as your replacement rate is higher than your death rate, you can do whatever you want and be harsh, and you're gonna have a very high profit for doing so at the cost of human lives. Columbus is basically running a system of feudalism where your peasants have to work land a certain amount of time, and then they're also dying from diseases, so he has to keep people safe. So yeah, of course you're gonna have a slower production rate, and the Spanish crown's gonna replace you because you're not being harsh enough, and the people are dying from disease. So what do you want? And you have to pick a side in this argument, and he's picking both because the fucking fence sitter
who accused him, who is being accused of being too kind by red tubers. Well, is there no wonder why far leftists hate centrists as well?
Yeah.
Going on.
Yeah.
Colonists and native people. He was arrested, and during his journey back to Spain, he wrote a letter where he defends himself against various accusations, including the sexual slavery of 9-year-old girls. The context of that quote is him complaining about a thing happening and how that thing is harming his reputation. But that doesn't change the fact that it was still happening. He was in charge, and he wasn't really trying very hard to stop it. In fact, he may have even participated in it. The context of that...
Once again, it's awfully hard to stop these things such as child abuse and sexual abuse when there's a freaking smallpox outbreak killing 90% of your island, right? It's kind of hard to find the perpetrators and who's doing it when everyone's dying. It's very hard to run a justice system when your judge, jury, and executioner are all dying. It's what do you think is going to happen? You can go on.
And then they still put the onus on Europeans for spreading diseases when, well, how are they able to control that?
Yeah, I mean,
they're still shaming them to this day because of that, even though that was beyond anyone's control. And waffle it around by saying, well, in some situations, they actually use diseases as a biological weapon when at best, it is extremely rare. In documented cases, at least.
Again, it's the narrative that Europeans brought diseases. Yeah, diseases spread. If no European ever set foot on American soil and they just developed independently into the industrial era and started trading naturally, diseases would have still spread and wiped them out. Okay. It would have happened. It was inevitable. Sorry, sometimes evolution is very mean to people, and you roll the bad dice. Okay, just look at coronavirus right now for everybody. It's just that's the way the world is. The world isn't fair. Sometimes a big bad disease comes and wipes out your entire civilization. That happens.
Quote, while interesting, doesn't change the reality. I did a similar thing in this video. Does the fact that this quote was written when he was a 22-year-old newspaper reporter change the fact that they burned down entire villages? Obviously not. I also did a pretty poor job of explaining the translation section of my original video. I've regretted that since the day I uploaded it. If only I could use the power of 2020 hindsight to... So the original intent of that section...
Yeah, so this is the famous quote. Columbus says, I could conquer the whole of them with 50 men and govern them as I please. It's a man writing his journal. Look at how innocent these people are because they don't have steel weapons. And then the second quote, unless your highness should order them all to be brought to Castile or to keep captives with the same islands, For with 50 men I could subjugate them all and make them do what is required of them. Again, subjugation in this sense doesn't mean slavery. It means vassalage, because it's a feudal system. You're subjecting a people to being your vassals, which is what was the system that was previously described, which he's now contradicting himself and trying to say it's slavery. He just previously said it's not akin to slavery. It was like a sort of like a feudal system, which it was a feudal system. And here's going right back to the slavery argument. He literally just contradicted his own argument. I think he's going to go into like saying it's a bad translation, which, you know, fair enough. And the guy translating this, Casas, is his political rival, so he has an intent to translate it as worse as he could. So, you know, make of that what you will. That's it. That's my little rant with that.
Was to show how people can pick and choose different translations to convey whatever meaning they want. These two translations are derived from the same original sentence. One of them makes it seem like Columbus was personally power hungry, while the other makes it look like a suggestion, one of the many possible options for the king and queen to choose from regarding what to do with the islands. I obviously favor the second interpretation, but that doesn't change the fact that Columbus was like, hey, it would be super easy to take these people over. Just saying. Columbus was in prison for 6 weeks.
Again, yeah, a king and queen want to take things over. That doesn't mean enslave them. It means bring them under the crown. Exactly what kings and queens do. It's you know, when the Spanish conquered like various territories in the Holy Roman Empire through inheritance or war, or more accurately, when the Spanish took over, for example, like Aragon and the islands south of Spain in the Mediterranean island. I forget the name of them. Like, you know,
The Islands.
Yeah. When they took those islands over from whatever, I forgot what country was taking them over before. Like, they didn't enslave the entire population and bring them into like chattel slavery. No, they subjugated them. They became a new vassal territory with a lord and local systems. It's like, it's an annoying thing because like the modern era thinks it's so like fair and progressive and like, and just generalizes the entire past into like the worst possible mode to make itself feel better, which is just like dumb. These are feudal systems that take over territories. Often they will inherit the way vassalage wars work in that time period is that you would take over the country, replace their monarchy with your monarchy, and pretty much all the nobility was like still nobility because those are the people that help you run the country. You can't run a territory on your own. More often than not, the nobility of any conquered and subjugated people don't lose much. They just serve a new king. And then the peasants have to, like, you know, sometimes the peasants have to convert, or sometimes the peasants have to adopt a few new practices or give a retinues or something like that. Not retinues, you know, soldiers and warriors, stuff like that. Big deal. They're still serfs. Nothing has changed for them. The only thing that happens when you conquer someone or subjugate someone in the vassal era, in the medieval era for vassalage, is that you replace the high end. You replace the high end people at the top of the king with a new king. Everything else stays the same. That's it. Sorry. Go on.
After which they gave him all of his land and wealth back and sent him off on his fourth voyage in 1502. The Caribbean was now under the governorship of Nicolas de Ovando, who hated Columbus and hated the Taino people even more, seeing them as a rebellious people who needed to be pacified. The native people had been so decimated that by 1515, Bartolomé de las Casas gave up his encomienda and advocated for the importation of African slaves instead. Decades later, he said that was a mistake, but the damage had already been done. African slaves were brought to the Americas by the millions.
Yeah, again, like, and this Casas is the guy who translated Columbus's journals. So again, people will often like ignore any political incentives to support their narratives. Casas advocated for African Americans. I don't think he fully repented of saying this later on in his life. I think he just said, like, I should read more into it, but he fundamentally did advocate for slavery, and he said because, quote, if I remember correctly, he said Africans work better than Native Americans. So Casas didn't actually reject the argument of the new governor that the people were rebellious and needed to be broken. He didn't actually disagree with this. He was also racist. And he said, oh, but like the Africans, they work better and don't rebel as often. So let's just replace the population. Good old demographic shift scheming. You know, very, very typical for these enlightened people to do to this day.
The cheap labor.
Yeah, like again, all the narratives we hear today were all playing out this time period. And again, the irony is that they'll call them sinners and do the same exact thing. Like this is fundamentally what their argument is for immigration. Oh, like all the third world people, they work better than these dang rebellious black people in our own cities. Nothing's changed. They're still just as racist progressives. That's it. My little rant.
Let's see. Wait, he imported them to the island of Hispaniola, which would be modern day, well, partly modern day Dominican Republic.
Yeah. And Haiti.
Yes. Didn't those Africans contribute to the genetic pool of the Dominican Republic a little?
Yeah.
And keep in mind that's a little compared to Haiti, which is that's almost 100% because of the extinction of the Taino people.
Yeah.
To the point that it's an African country outside of Africa.
Yeah. Haiti.
Albeit they speak French Creole.
Yeah. Taino people are pretty rare these days. There's like a couple of groups of them left. I think I remember. I might be confusing them with another group, but I think they have a significant populations in Cuba and elsewhere. But like again, like these people were scheming demographic shifts for maximum profit, just like today, and the progressives will call them evil for doing it, and then go and do it themselves.
Moving on.
Millions, partially because they already had an immunity to the many Afro-Eurasian diseases which killed 90% of the Native American population by 1600.
Pause.
In many cases,
This is the 90% narrative, which again I do doubt significantly. We have documents, archaeological evidence of whole cities destroyed in North America, actually, that were destroyed before. If I remember correctly, they were destroyed before European contact. Something was happening in Native American lands before the Europeans arrived that was causing a lot of destruction. It's not really clear what it was, but the only ones who could endure it were the Aztec and the Inca primarily, and everywhere else was just collapsing. Again, we're not really sure what the hell happened. It seems like there was a big war or genocide that occurred, but like there used to be an Aztec-like civilization in the Mississippi River Valley. I can screen share some photos of these cities if you want. Should I?
Yes, that's different from the typical, Native Americans fighting each other over land in North America, right? That's different, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I'll screen share this and show you some examples of this. So here in America, in the Mississippi Valley, you had we don't know who they were called because they were extinct before Europeans arrived, but they were called. We called them the sorry, I just have to find where it was. Oh, here we go. Okay, there you go. So this is a rough map over here of all the populations of Native American people. I'll view this image. So this is like these are all the wiped out people before the Europeans arrived. There were several civilizations besides the Aztec. The Mississippi River was full of pyramid builders that built great big cities, just as big as Mexico City, a little bit smaller than Mexico City. Very, very powerful kingdoms. Their cities looked like this. Like they were very large, complicated civilizations with pyramids. To this day, I think you can still find the pyramids in Mississippi like this right here. I'll show you an image of this. So, like for example, you see like this is like the remnants of a pyramid in Mississippi. Very clearly was a big structure, required a lot of labor. These are big cities. All of these civilizations were wiped out by something before. That's the wrong one. Before the Europeans arrived, thousands upon thousands of people killed. It looks like it was some kind of big war that had like very bad implications for people, and so this entire region became like just wiped out and was non-existent.
Excuse me for a second. Someone is calling me.
Okay, I'll talk to the audience a bit. Hello, dear audience. The extent of the Native American civilizations were fairly. This is the river system itself, but like they were mostly aligned down the main river system here. And there are a lot of cool stuff. really cool civilizations. Built a lot of cool things. There's a Iroquois tribe map. There's another interesting group of people. Where's their name? Tribes.
Okay, so I'm back.
Nice. Yeah, I was just going into different areas. So yeah, like something happened before the Europeans arrived that basically wiped out most of the city states in North America. The Aztec arose in this chaos to become a very dictatorial power. The Incans were the most friendly and stable government down South America. And these people did not know about each other's existence, obviously, but there was a lot of migration occurring. You also see like there's various Native American tribes in Arizona. You might not know this, but you know how Phoenix has a bunch of canals in air. Oh yeah, so sorry, I don't. Are you actually American or Canadian?
I'm American.
Okay. Oh yeah, so like the city of Phoenix has all these canals, and what isn't known, that well, most people don't know, is that these canals were actually created by the Native Americans before the Europeans arrived, as part of a big infrastructure project for some lost civilization. And essentially, when the Americans arrived in the area, they found all these canals that were like kind of abandoned, full of gunk, and they basically just cleared them out and used them to build Phoenix. Hence the phrase Phoenix. They were the rising of the ruins out of the ashes. There was a lot of destruction that occurred before the Europeans arrived. And so the whole idea of like 90% of Native Americans being wiped out by Europeans is a bit of a farce, because significant amount of that 90% occurred before the Europeans even arrived. These figures are based off of finding ruins and assuming it came from Europeans when that's not really true. We did wipe out through disease most of the Native American people of the Mexico region and the New England region. This is true. But the rest of like all of Latin America, the figure is closer to something like 60 to 30%. A lot less, depending on like if the society had a good health system or not. Not healthcare system, like healthcare. They knew the local wilderness, the local plants and stuff. So some cultures were very good at knowing natural cures to things. Again, like if you look at like, I think let me look up the figures for like how many people. Incan conquest. Oh yeah, there's a claim that like 7 million Incans died of typhus and smallpox, and only 600,000 survived. This is a bit of a farce, because most of the people just ran to the mountain cities, which even to this day we're still discovering, like in Peru and Chile. There are whole cities that we just didn't know existed. They continued existing after colonization and were just slowly like abandoned as people went to go work in Spanish cities. It's probably something like 60 to 40% of the population of the Incan Empire died, not 90%. These figures get generalized because, if a progressive finds one city that the 90% people were wiped out, they'll inflate that to, oh, this must be true for every city. It's bullshit. It's nonsense.
When the Europeans arrived to North America, did they even find any giant ruins of those cities that were wiped out before they arrived? There should have been, or must have been, some documents about that.
Yeah, we have some evidence. Obviously, the Mississippi River, the pyramids and stuff like that we find. There's a famous photograph from North America. Yeah, I found the photo. So like in North America, there are also these things called shell middens, which are like the remnants of something of a civilization. Most people assume that they're just like leftover from generations of shell fishing. Sorry, I'm trying to find where where you are in my many images up right now. Okay. Sorry, I got lost. I want to share my screen to show this image. There's a famous image of what shell middens were. So this is all the way up in New England. There we go. Share screen. There you go. So these are the think of shell middens as well, you can kind of see it here. Like, you see how there's like almost like a foundation outline for something? Like, these are like outlines of what might have been buildings once. They're kind of like walls and stuff. There's a few good photos of this. This is a famous photo right here of a gentleman looking at the walls. So these are like up in Maine, and shell middens were basically just like stacks of seashells that form like walls of sorts and stuff like that. And basically on the top of these you'd have like wooden structures that would like help with fishing and stuff like that. And the shell middens were like sometimes for foundations, sometimes for waste, just dumping sites, sometimes for like being above the tide line, stuff like that. And so like you end up having these very interesting ruins in some places in North America. Supposedly these went up like feet upon feet upon feet, but the thing is they're made of seashells, right? And do you know what seashells are good at?
Making cement.
Well, yes, but also something else. They're good for fertilizer. And so when the British arrived and found these giant towers of seashells just laying around as like ruins, they burned them for fertilizer. So we don't have a lot of them left to look at and investigate.
And they're going to, and the progressive would just blame the destruction of the ruins on whites or cities in general, when those had been abandoned long before they arrived.
Yeah, he's a good probably like outline of a few of them that soon to form settlements. This kind of architecture shows up all the way north in Maine to all the way down south in Florida. You'll also find shell middens in Florida, which are pretty cool. Yes, like this is the thought of what they looked like as a civilization. This would have been what the coast looked like about maybe a few centuries before the British arrived. You would have had these coastal cities using seashells as like foundations for wooden structures to go fishing on. It's like they would live amongst these seashell stack piles that they would build as like kind of like structural foundations. And so these are like the ruins of what we find. So there were whole cities that were just totally gone and abandoned by the time the Europeans arrived. And so again, like the 90% figure comes from the fact that these were all abandoned, and it's like on one level you're guessing how big those settlements were based off purely on foundation stones. You could be wrong, depending on their family structure. A society might have maybe 4 people in one of these ruins, or maybe 20 people in one of these ruins, depending on how densely populated they are. And so you end up having this kind of weird situation. Yeah, like a lot of these and it's kind of like they'll shape them. The Native Americans will like shape them into these funny shapes to build cities on. But we don't know how big they were, how many people lived in there, and so that's an assumption. We don't know how long they were abandoned for. That's another assumption. We don't know what killed them. So that's another assumption. And we don't know. There's just so many unknowns, and then this gets reduced down to basically being, it must have been white people killing them, which is just like not true. And well, it is true in some instances, but it's highly unlikely to be true on all instances. So anyway, that's my little rant about the fact that the 90% figure is not really a true statement. On average, it would probably be closer to something like 60%, which is still a lot of people, but you have like a significant number of people that survive. And how many of that 60% were caused by direct European genocides? Like, I'm going to kill these people. That might be as low as like 10 to 20%, even less. Could be as low as 2%, depending on how you define a genocide.
Okay. Shall we move on with the video?
is well before European contact. Obviously, not all of these deaths can be directly attributed to Columbus.
Columbus's regime was so senselessly brutal that by 1542, the Taino population on the island had fallen to 200.
This sentence was the impetus behind the original Columbus video. If you want to say that it was the system he established or the culture he created, then say that. Saying Columbus regime makes it so misleading that it's false. Columbus was removed as governor in 1500 and died in 1506. How did his regime last until 1542 when even his sons were dead for decades at that point? Let me be clear. Christopher Columbus is directly responsible for the deaths of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands. The resulting European colonization, which he started, killed millions more through disease transmission and military conflict, and continued.
See how that little trick he did with mixing disease and military campaigns? You want to know what the ratio of that is?
What?
Like the disease killed like if we're counting how many people died from disease versus war, the wars only killed a couple of thousand people. The diseases killed hundreds of thousands of people. He basically just grouped in like 2% death cause with a 98% death caused, just to group it together. That's a subtle trick, but you gotta watch out for stuff like that. It's just a straight up lie.
Not only that, but I think he just did already a centrist argument about, well, he died in 1506, thus it's dishonest to call it the Columbus regime within the island of Hispaniola. And yet he backtracked by claiming that he's still directly, no wait, that's right, he's still the direct cause of thousands of deaths. Or something like what he said. Did you see that?
Yeah, and again, like this is assuming a population of an island which had no cities, no significant ruins or structures. They were a tribal people. How there's usually a projection that there must have been millions of people living on these islands, which I just find ridiculous. You're not going to have a population of millions of peoples if they don't live in cities. That's simply a mathematical reality. At most, you'd have a population of a few 100,000 people. And this claim that it reduced down to 200, I mean, I don't exactly know how you're doing polls during a smallpox outbreak and wars. I highly doubt there's any census occurring at this time. This is purely an estimate, and it's just a joke to take it seriously in any way. Again,
Well,
like he
there
did.
There was a census made on the island of Hispaniola in the year 1514.
Yeah.
Uh,
But like, how are people identifying themselves, right? Like by 1514, you have a generation and a half of people who have grown up under Spanish intermixing, and so are they going to call themselves mestizo? Are they going to call themselves natives? Are they going to call themselves what are they, right? Because again, like the casa system that the Spanish set up, you benefit by not calling yourself native. So if you call yourself mestizo because like your great grandfather was a Spaniard, that like you're like kind of like only 20% related to or something like that, then most population would still be Taino. They're just not calling themselves Taino anymore. They're calling themselves mestizo.
and I heard that within the same census, it said that 40% of the Spanish had Taino wives, which,
There you go.
although how many Spanish were living on the island compared to the Taino by then, I don't know the exact numbers.
Yeah, and again, like the census keepers, is this a medieval census where they don't count the serfs? Is this a more modern census where they count the serfs? That's something you have to ask. Sometimes they don't count the serfs because they're just the property of the land. You're only counting the people that make the money, the landowners. This is a big overlook in a lot of censuses of that era. And again, yeah, if 40% of the Spanish on the island have native wives and their children are being called Spaniards, then 40% of the island is mixed and probably significantly native. Because if you have two half natives and they get married, they're now 75% native, but they're going to call themselves Spanish.
Moving on.
Yeah, go on.
to keep people in really poor conditions to this day. That video was me looking down the list of charges and evidence against Columbus and saying, I don't really know if 2 or 3 of these really belong on here. This video is me saying that the rest of this list is still really long. 2 years ago, I was nitpicking terrible historical arguments for fun to an audience of basically nobody. Now that I have an audience, I try to be more responsible. A few weeks ago during my video on the Stanford prison experiment, I said, so I get why they did it, but that doesn't make it right. I wish I had...
Okay, would you agree with that statement where he said, I understand why they did it, but that doesn't make it right?
I didn't quite catch what the context for that was.
Oh, all right. It requires watching a different video, so
Yeah.
I guess let's move on.
I know.
said that years ago, and that's going to be my approach to history moving forward. I've heard the criticism from fans that I don't do enough history anymore. I've also heard critics say that my non-history videos are still okay. But almost all of my videos are history videos. I may not talk about World War II or Vietnam, but I will talk about Milgram and Zimbardo or the political party switch.
Okay, one thing I need to point out was on the video he made, the political ships of Theseus. At one point in the video, at least if I could remember, he cited a source. Let's see. He cited a video to from ContraPoints of all people. And I can't remember why he cited, but he cited that video from ContraPoints at one point in that video, saying something about black neighborhoods and something. The specific ContraPoints video he cited had been debunked by the alternative hypothesis about a year earlier, which is why, and keep in mind, I used to subscribe to Knowing Better back around 2018 because I thought he was a reasonable person. That was until the moment he cited ContraPoints made me question about him. Because I was also subscribed to the alternative hypothesis as well. And he cited a video from ContraPoints, and that specific video had already been responded by alt-hype.
Yeah, I'll admit I unsubscribed from him, I think, if I remember correctly, because I didn't like how much of an obvious plant he was for the left. The pseudo, he moved on from being a wall sitter to a pseudo wall sitter in the left. Anyway, let's go on.
I mean, I still don't understand what was that political ship of Theseus talking about, other than the general switch between the Democrats and the Republicans, and I still don't even understand what was the switch about, other than a few people tell me that the parties never actually switched except for one brief moment, which I still don't understand.
Yeah.
Moving on.
Or Paradise Lost, all of which are history labeled as something else. History is more than just battles. It's the story we tell ourselves about why things are the way they are. Sometimes that's through politics, sometimes it's psychology. And the best version of that story can be found on Audible by going to audible.com/knowingbetter.
Wait.
I think that's the end, right? Yeah.
Maybe. Let me
So
have
be
a look.
supporting the channel when you do. About Columbus, and Columbus deserve all of the hate. 500.
Okay,
You'll
I
also be
skipped the
supporting the
ad.
channel when you do. Does Columbus deserve all of the hate that he gets? I used to think that if it were up to me, we'd talk about Columbus in the same way we do Magellan, buried in some middle paragraph of history. But now I know that's just not possible. Not only because of the historical and educational value of his story, but because we have a day to celebrate him. And we shouldn't. As long as our calendar, and by extension our government and
I really don't care about this Cultural Revolution bullshit. Like, the reason why we celebrate Christopher Columbus in America, at least, has to do with Italian immigrants. That's pretty much all there is to it. Latin America celebrated him a lot longer than us because, it started this entire civilization. The mestizo civilization, that is.
Living alongside the natives and the criollos.
Yeah. I mean, they're part of the civilization too, but they're not the main show. Mestizos are who won the Casa system that existed then. And I don't like anyone who says we shouldn't celebrate someone just because they're no longer relevant to whatever culture that came from. Like in that logic, you shouldn't celebrate anything because everything will eventually be viewed ill of. Nothing lasts forever. Everything will eventually become unpopular. So why celebrate any day? They're all temporary. It's just like such a stupid argument. You have a bunch of Italians in your country. Columbus was Italian. The thing you did to make the Italians feel represented because they were literally nobodies. They didn't even have when Italians started coming to America, Italy as a state didn't even exist. So they had to like manufacture a history for them to feel like they had any. So just let them have their thing. Who cares? Like if you, personally, being that I am a Russian and a Irishman, I don't really care about Columbus Day. I celebrate Leif Erikson Day because that's my people. Leif Erikson was a Icelander who married a Scots woman and had a lot of Irish crewmen, and his king was off in Russia or somewhere. So like, hey, this is like my story. I'm gonna associate myself with Leif Erikson more because I'm not really Italian, really. So like, I don't care about Columbus. What's Columbus' story to me? I was there. My people were here first. Fuck off. But I don't think you should remove the day just because I said that.
Or rename the day to Indigenous Peoples Day.
Yeah, like every single time whenever someone talks about Indigenous Peoples Day, it's like, okay, why is it that day? And you force them to talk about Columbus. It's like, well, if you're just talking about Columbus, then just call it Columbus Day.
Mental gymnastics.
Yeah.
Not only that, but isn't that some sort of capitulation he's making? Because because back when they were around the time of Charlottesville, the left was advocating for the removal of Confederate statues, and the conservatives capitulated because they thought they're just going after Confederate statues, and they don't agree with the Confederates. Or thought that they were just being put into museums, except that didn't happen. Then they started going, and it turns out to be a capitulation because they went after more statues other than the Confederates, including Union soldiers, Union generals, the founding fathers, Abraham Lincoln, and Christopher Columbus.
Yeah, I mean,
so nothing to do with the Confederacy. It's Europeans in general.
Yeah, and I mean here I'm in New York, and so like we still have.
And I heard that, I can't remember whether that was removed or not, but I heard a story from Arizona that had something to do with the removal or a controversy with a Spanish conqueror being represented as a statue.
I think it was a saint. Which they're just like ripping down statues of saints is kind of useless because the Catholic Church will actively rebuild them and say fuck off. I fully advocate looking up all the statues that were torn down and just like remaking them and just keeping them on your yard and just photographing them. Like, oh, I still have one. Just like tempt the left. Just tempt them, because like if you replace the things that they break and have to make them do more work, then you're making them get frustrated, and you don't have to get frustrated. Don't get angry when they do this shit because they're retarded. Just make a new one, make your own, put it up, and take a photograph and say, well, now you made me make another one, and then just make a second one and make more and piss them off. It's just they're people that the only way to get rid of these people is to piss them off to such an extent that they get tired and stop trying, because the more they get angry, the more they fail, and the more they fail, the more tired they get, and eventually they just burn out and just burn them out faster. Anyway, I was saying in New York City we still have Columbus Circle. I was actually surprised there was like pretty much no significant protests around Columbus Circle this year. Columbus Day seemed to just like pass by without anything in New York City, which is kind of interesting to me. I think the narrative. What?
I was going to say, well, I initially thought maybe it had something to do with the locked door, the pandemic, but then again, that would be very odd. Given that, well, riots around cities still happen even during the pandemic, so that can't be an excuse. And also, there was one acquaintance from South America who told me about a story of, I can't remember who, it had something to do with radical feminists attacking a statue or an art mural of a Mexican general from the 19th, a Mexican president from the 19th century who is actually a politically communist. And despite my disagreements with the Mexican president who was a communist, he pointed out that the Mexicans still consider him as very important, to the point that they actually went after the feminist who was destroying, or at least negatively depicting, the Mexican president. I think that was Zapata, that art mural was negatively being depicted as homosexual, and the Mexicans was very angry about that, despite my hatred towards the communists. There's some nuance on why the Mexicans did that, given that they consider Zapata to be an important part of Mexican history, despite my hatred towards communists. And yet they defended him from radical feminists depicting him as a homosexual or something like that.
Yeah,
This is something that can't happen in the U.S. because of the weakness among the general population.
I have to say, the Latin Americans have done a great job of integrating history and culture with their identity, and like now, like you really can't be against these founding people, regardless of race, because like Latin America never had much of a racial dichotomy, so to speak, and they did from the Casas system, but they kind of hijacked the Casas system and turned it up on itself to like in some countries it was actually illegal to marry your own race. They had legally enforced race mixing, and that was the extent. I think that was like Uruguay or Paraguay, I forget which, but that was the extent with which how much Latin America just totally rejected like social justice stuff, to the extent that they actively used the law to erase racial boundaries that like they saw would possibly create like social justice people. I kind of look to Latin America as like what America should do to get rid of social justice warriors, because Latin America figured this out like a century ago, and just they completely like destroyed it. Actually, can I screen share something really quick?
Just what?
Anthropophagio. You know what this is?
No.
It's like an ideology. Actually, no, I can never find a good link to it. I'll just explain. Anthropophagio is the Brazilian way of dealing. It's like a Brazilian response to racial nationalism, so to speak, where they kind of viewed themselves as cultural cannibals. They basically argued Brazil isn't going to pick a specific group that it is going to like say is a victim or an oppressor. We are quote unquote cannibals. Anthropophagio is Portuguese for cannibal, and they called it the Anthropophagio Manifesto. And it was, we eat other cultures, we don't play victim oppressor. If someone comes to our shores, we integrate them into our culture as part of our culture. There isn't going to be a victim or an oppressor. It's going to be just Brazilians. And I find this to be a unique approach to countering American progressivism. It's kind of like the complete opposite end of it. Anyway, sorry for the little rant. This is a curiosity.
That lead to more negative consequences, though. I mean, we've already had issue. I mean, how do I say this? How do I say this without sounding awkward? Wouldn't that lead to more identity issues at best? With the constant race mixing?
I think it can have a potential to do that, but for some reason in Latin America it didn't really, like, European, in places like Chile, the pure Europeans are kind of memed about, like, oh look, this person thinks they're Latin American but they're white, but there's not really any like oppressor narrative to it, right? It's not like, oh, you're white so you're an oppressor. It's, oh, you're white, you're not Latin American. There's not a victimhood to it, really.
Although I think that social justice is already spreading to Latin America. I mean, I heard someone from Argentina that claimed that a few schools in Argentina was already spreading the anti-white guilt towards the how do I say this, towards most Argentinians who are mostly white,
Yeah.
which is
Argentina.
odd because that is a completely different history,
Yeah.
especially with the mass immigration of Italians.
Yeah. Argentina is a bit of a unique case because of that. But anyway, we can finish this off. I think I should head out soon. But
Okay.
and our culture continues to elevate him as a symbol of colonial domination, he deserves to be torn down. Get rid
No.
of Columbus Day. New
Yeah,
year,
yeah.
new outro.
Okay.
Enough of that. Yeah, I don't really care. Colonization was based. I'm fully for colonizing stuff if it means the end product is a more better society. I'm not one of these like idiots who thinks, oh, my bad, colonization. No, I actively hope America gets colonized by someone who has better morals. If some nation out there gets better morals, please come colonize us and just teach us better morals, because this country's freaking ridiculous with its morals. Like, if some pro-life country gets to be an empire one day, please come colonize America quickly, as soon as you can. I'm not somebody who's gonna play like, oh, my independence bullshit. No, fuck that. Culture has a right and a wrong, and we have gone wrong. Get the right back.
I really wish there was the third person here.
Sorry.
I was about to invite someone else as well, but he got very busy, and I think it was too late for him to come at this point. Otherwise, we would have to make another live stream next week, possibly. So I think this wraps up, folks. Any concluding opinions or something? Hello?
Oh, me?
Yes.
Oh, I guess my concluding opinions are if you detect a certain kind of fidgeting of people, you can probably guess that they're just looking for something to be right about. They don't actually know what they're trying to say. They're like intellectual leeches that are just looking for a spot to suck from. I think that's what a lot of the arguments against Columbus being like this big bad guy come fundamentally from the desire to find something wrong with the person. And you can find something wrong with anyone. And the second they find something wrong with them, they leech onto that spot as like something to babble about for the next 20 years. It's just kind of pathetic.
Okay, so I guess this wraps up. There was another second video we were about to respond, but given the low number of people in the stream, I guess we should end it right now. And besides, it took us over an hour just to respond to a 15-minute video, even with the skipping of unnecessary stuff.
Yeah.
So-
Thanks for having me on. Actually, it was pretty fun talking to
So,
folks about this.
how was my engagement in the stream so far? Because it was extremely awkward compared to other live streams from the YouTubers we watch, such as Settlers Lament or Charlotte or Endeavor, because I'm extremely awkward.
Yeah, I like this engagement system. It was pretty fun. You read out, I think, like something like 3 or 4 comments that were coming in, which I think you were pretty engaged with the audience and people like that. Yeah, we currently have 6 people viewing, and I think you've looked at any comments that came in, so you were attentive and it was good.
Okay, then. So, goodbye then. I guess this wraps up.
Yeah, bye. Have a good Sunday.
Well, good night.
Good night. Do you end the stream and do like a little post conversation, or should I just leave?
No, I think we should leave now.
Okay, see you.
And
Have a good
podcast.
night. Yeah.